family always said that you only felt sorry for yourself, and I didn't want to believe that because I thought, surely he has to feel bad for killing my family. And when I heard that you felt no remorse, something changed inside of me. And I didn't know what to do with that change, and it was causing me a lot of hurt and anger because that was my closure. My closure was the hope that you would feel bad. I no longer have the desire for any closure because this is it. There's nothing left on this earth that will soothe my wounds and worries. Only God can help me now.
This video depicts Cassidy Stay, the lone survivor of a massacre that occurred in Harris County, Texas, speaking directly to the man that murdered her entire family. It's a case that shocked the millions of residents of the county, mostly because of the absolute ruthlessness of the perpetrator. Today, we're going to unpack the sequence of events that led up to July 9th, 2014, when 33-year-old Ronald Lee Haskell killed 6 people in cold blood. It was the kind of attack that happened with no warning, although if you look close enough, you might see the countless clues that suggested how utterly homicidal Haskell was throughout his life. But even so, he wasn't always the murderous monster that was capable of massacring a family. Once upon a time, Haskell was a normal kid just like any other. Let's peel back the curtain of time and take a look at where he came from to better understand the man he turned into. Ronald Haskell was born on the 26th of August, 1980 in San Marcos, California. His Mormon parents were very devout and closely integrated into the local religious community. Their neighbors and friends were all Mormons, which shows that the Haskells liked to stay with their own people as much as possible. One of the most respected members of the community was Tom Stay, the local bishop. The Haskells and the Stays grew quite close, since there weren't all that many Mormons in Southern California at that time. The adults weren't the only ones that loved spending time with each other, though. Their children also played together endlessly, with Haskell and the bishop's son, Stephen Stay, growing closely acquainted. Stephen was 5 years older than Haskell, so it's possible that he acted like an older brother to him. However, everything changed when Haskell's family moved to Alaska. The sudden shock to his delicately balanced life might have had a huge impact on Haskell's mental state, but he didn't show any outward signs of it. When he graduated from Chugiak High School in Eagle River, Alaska in 1999, he was a very popular member of the student body. No one could have imagined what he'd be capable of such extreme levels of violence. In fact, most of his classmates thought of him as a funny, approachable guy, and even voted him class clown in their graduation year. But Haskell wasn't just the funny kid in class. By all accounts, he was also extremely popular, becoming the prom and homecoming king during his high school career. But all of this charm was hiding something truly sinister beneath the surface. Haskell had a violent streak, one that would only come out when he had some level of power over another person. Devout Mormon men often expect strict obedience from their wives. As a result, Haskell was likely waiting to enjoy the domination that this type of relationship offered to unleash his brutal urges. Around the time Haskell was graduating high school, his childhood friend Stephen, who was 24 at the time, got married to 18-year-old Katie Lyon. Katie had a younger sister, Melanie, and they were both also part of the Mormon community that Haskell had grown up in.
She was all about do something to better yourself every day, do something good every day, and that's what they taught their children. That's why they were such a strong family and why we all gravitated towards them, because they were always constantly trying to improve and treat everyone better every day.
Stephen operated a real estate business that grew immensely successful in his Southern California home. Shortly after they got married, he and Katie had their first child, Cassidy, who'd end up being the only surviving member of the family after the massacre. Cassidy was followed by Brian in 2001, Emily in 2005, Rebecca in 2008, and young Zachary in 2010. They were a big family, but based on reports from neighbors and others that knew them, they were very happy. The business was going well, and the kids were enjoying a carefree childhood. Seeing her sister's domestic bliss, Melanie also wanted to find herself a husband. Through the Mormon community, she ended up meeting Ron Haskell and was immediately charmed by him. What she didn't know was that she was up for several years of torment at his hands. On March 15, 2002, Haskell and Melanie headed to Orange County, California to get married. The wedding took place in the home of Tom Stay, with the entire community coming together to mark the occasion. The couple looked as happy as could be, but there's a chance that Haskell was already planning to exert full control over his wife's life. Haskell and Melanie stayed in Eagle River, Alaska for a couple of years. Where they stayed between 2004 and 2006 is unclear, but it's possible that they lived in California where they had plenty of friends and family. However, in 2006, Haskell made a strange decision. He might have felt like he wouldn't have the level of control over his wife that he wanted in a state like California, and it's possible that he felt like Utah, the center of the Mormon culture, would be a better fit. In July of 2006, the couple moved to Logan, Utah. Haskell didn't show any real signs of violence yet. It's possible that his quick temper showed in all sorts of ways, and he might have even hit his wife on a few occasions, but nothing made it into the public record. However, once he found himself in the much more conservative environment of small-town Utah, his violent urges could no longer be contained. In the summer of 2008, Haskell's mask finally slipped when he brutally beat his wife. The cause of the altercation is unknown, but whatever Melanie did, it made Haskell so uncontrollably angry that he dragged her by her hair and hit her repeatedly. The assault began in the bedroom, but when Haskell dragged her out, he ended up exposing his 2 children to his violence. The kids were only 3 and 5 years old at the time, but they were still old enough to recognize that something awful was happening. Melanie's injuries were severe, so much so that the police had to get involved. They charged Haskell with domestic violence, simple assault, and committing an act of violence against children. He could have gone to jail, and if he had, a lot of misery that followed a few years down the line could have been prevented. As it turns out, Haskell pleaded guilty to the assault charge, and he was given leniency for the other charges. This is the only recorded instance of Haskell hitting Melanie, but there's a lot to suggest that it was a common occurrence. In 2009, Haskell called the police saying that Melanie had run away from home. He eventually found her at a nearby hospital, and the matter concluded without further incident. However, you might ask why Melanie felt the need to run away, especially when she had young children at her home. It's possible that Haskell's treatment of her was just too much to bear. On July 8, 2013, Melanie filed a protective order against Haskell. She wanted to make her escape, which would set Haskell on the warpath. After the protective order was granted, Melanie filed for divorce in August of that year. A few months later, Melanie was given full custody of the children, with the judge ruling that any time Haskell would spend with the kids would be supervised by a psychologist who would decide whether or not he was a physical threat to them. This was a massive humiliation for Haskell. He could tell that he'd probably never again gain custody of his children, and Melanie was never going to take him back. A month after the divorce was finalized, he left Utah disgraced and moved back in with his parents in San Marcos, and a few weeks after that, he lost his job as a FedEx delivery driver. As for Melanie, she headed to Texas, where her sister Katie and her family had relocated in 2012. Melanie wanted a fresh start. She wanted to be able to put the past behind her. Unfortunately, a Haskell-shaped train had already started hurtling towards her, and it would destroy anything and anyone that stood in its path. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. In early 2014, Melanie finally made the move to Houston, getting help from her sister to get settled in. During this time, there is a strong likelihood that she was in contact with Haskell's mother. While there's no evidence of this, Haskell certainly seemed to think that they were talking behind his back because he assaulted his own mother under this belief. On July 2nd, San Marcos police received a call from Haskell's mother. She wanted a restraining order against her son after he'd brutally attacked her and provided excruciating details about the torment she'd endured. According to her statement, Haskell had beaten her up and dragged her to a computer chair where he restrained her with duct tape. He then threatened to kill her, saying that he knew that she had been in touch with his ex-wife. Haskell left his parents' home that same day, and San Marcos police were unable to locate him. It was later revealed that he'd started making his way to Houston, where he possibly wanted to confront Melanie. He had no job and no prospects, so this might have been the last act of a desperate man. No one could have predicted just how far he'd go in his pursuit of his former wife. On the 9th of July, 2014, a week after assaulting his mother, Haskell was seen in Harris County. We know a few details about his movements prior to his murderous rampage, such as the fact that he went to watch 22 Jump Street in the cinema before heading to the scene of the crime. Why exactly he did this is unclear, but it seems to suggest that he'd either already planned the murders and didn't think they were a big deal, or he hadn't decided to kill anyone just yet. However, it's almost certain that Haskell had violent intentions in mind because he'd gotten his hands on the gun. Police haven't commented on the source of the weapon, but Haskell's possession of it clearly indicates that he meant business. At some point in the early afternoon, he arrived at 711 Leaflet Lane, where the Stay family resided. He knocked on the door posing as a FedEx delivery driver, possibly wearing his old uniform to get them to open the door. 15-year-old Cassidy was the only one home at the time, with her parents and the other kids out running errands. She answered the door, and Haskell asked her where her parents were. After she told him they weren't around, he left. Moments later, he returned and informed her that he's her ex-uncle and that he wants to come inside and wait for her parents. Something felt off about this whole encounter to Cassidy. Haskell could have been giving off creepy or unsettling vibes, and she didn't want this man she didn't recognize entering her home. She tried to slam the door shut, but Haskell was a fully grown man, and he was able to overpower her. Once he forced his way inside, Haskell forced Cassidy to the floor, made her lay on her stomach, and ties her hands and feet together. He then sat and waited for Stephen and Katie to arrive along with the rest of the children. When the family came home, they were immediately held at gunpoint and made to lie in the same position as Cassidy. Haskell only wanted to know one thing: the location of his ex-wife. The Stay family refused to comply, knowing that if this man found out where Melanie was, he'd surely kill her. It's also possible that they didn't expect Haskell to follow through with his threats of shooting them. After all, this was a man that Stephen had known all his life and that Katie had known for several years as well. They'd been family not long ago. Haskell had gotten married at Stephen's childhood home. Despite all of this, when they refused to give him the location he wanted, he shot them point-blank execution style in the back of the head. He followed this up by shooting 13-year-old Brian, 9-year-old Emily, 6-year-old Rebecca, and 4-year-old Zachary the same way, along with Cassidy, who'd been tied up for hours by this point. After shooting all 7 family members, Haskell drove away in their car. Police responded to the scene after receiving reports of gunfire and found that Cassidy had miraculously survived her gunshot wound. She'd managed to get her finger between the bullet and her head, and while she suffered a skull fracture and a broken fingertip, she was at least alive. Haskell had spoken about his plans before shooting the family. He intended to go to the home of Katie and Melanie's parents and kill them as well if they didn't give him what he wanted. Luckily, Cassidy was alive to tell the police about his plot, and officers across the area started looking for the suspect. Since the police knew where Haskell was headed, they got to Katie and Melanie's parents' home first and escorted them to safety. Once Haskell drove up, he saw a small army of police officers waiting for him and tried to make a getaway. He was desperate to get away, but there was nowhere to escape to anymore. It didn't take long for the police to corner him in a cul-de-sac where he exited the car and aimed the gun at his head. He threatened to take his own life if he was arrested, and a 3-hour-long standoff ensued during which police called him on his cell phone. Other houses in the area were evacuated, and Haskell kept the gun pointed at his head. When officers were able to finally talk him down, he was taken in without putting up a fight. As he was being interrogated, he reportedly expressed no remorse for what he'd done. In his twisted mind, he might have thought that the killing of all of those people, 4 of whom were children, were justified in his hunt for his wife. The next day, the Harris County Sheriff's Office charged Haskell with 6 counts of capital murder and was held in custody without bond. While all of this was happening, Cassidy was released from the hospital. Her wounds were severe, her trauma even greater, but she was alive to watch the man that killed her family stand on trial. On July 11th, 2 days after his killing spree, Haskell appeared in court for the first time. He was wearing prison orange, his hair and beard were long and unkempt, and he didn't seem to be fully present. While the charges were being read, Haskell collapsed several times for no apparent reason. It's possible that he was shocked about the enormity of what he'd done. On the other hand, he might have been so traumatized by the fact that he'd faced justice that he couldn't take it anymore. Whatever the case may be, Haskell appeared in court several more times until his trial began in August 2019, half a decade after the Stay family was nearly wiped out. Cassidy was 20 years old by this point and therefore capable of testifying to what happened to her. She showed jurors the scar on the back of her head and told them how she had to play dead to survive the encounter. Cassidy's testimony proved crucial in convincing the jurors of Haskell's guilt. They unanimously convicted him on all counts on September 26, 2019, and prosecutors pushed for the death penalty. Such an extreme punishment is always a tough sell, but the judge found it appropriate given the sheer suffering Haskell had caused.
Ronald D. Haskell, the jury, having found you guilty of the capital murder of Stephen Stay and Katie Stay, and having returned a unanimous affirmative verdict to issue number 1 and a unanimous negative verdict to issue number 2, the court sentences you to death by lethal injection.
In the end, Cassidy was able to have the final word. As the trial drew to a close, she was allowed to take the stand one last time and read a letter she'd written to Haskell. It was a moment of catharsis, one that brought the entire tragic saga full circle.
When I heard that you felt no remorse, something changed inside of me. And I didn't know what to do with that change, and it was causing me a lot of hurt and anger because that was my closure. My closure was the hope that you would feel bad. I no longer have the desire for any closure because this is it. There's nothing left on this earth that will soothe my wounds and worries. Only God can help me now.
Ron Haskell is currently on death row at the Alan B. Polunsky unit, where he's awaiting his execution. He still somehow has supporters, with Judge Natalia Cornelio being asked to recuse herself from the case on October 7, 2024, when she was suspected of being biased towards him. The long wait is torturous for Cassidy Stay and the Lyon family, and the DA's office is apparently working overtime to make sure that the sentence is carried out quickly. So what do you think of this case? Did Haskell deserve to get the death penalty? How crucial was Cassidy's testimony in ensuring he'd face justice? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.